The past few weeks have been difficult. The viral videos of the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and the video of a white woman, Amy Cooper, calling the police on a black man because he asked her to leash her dog in an area of Central Park where that is required, have been difficult to swallow. As painful as this all has been, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that these lives and the suffering of so many are not in vain, but will help to bring about the change that's necessary, however incremental. One of the most encouraging things that I saw on social media was a post on Kara Goucher's Instagram page. For those of you who don't know, Kara Goucher is an incredibly accomplished American distance runner. She's also a white woman, and she posted an image of herself with this book, with a caption that read, "Ready to unpack my own privilege and prejudice to become the ally I want to be." And honestly, these were some of the most refreshing words I could have read. If you're white and you're watching this, and I hope you are, I want you to know that you're probably a nice person. You're a well-meaning person. You probably don't hate anyone and would never want to intentionally hurt anyone. But I also want to let you know that you have internalized racist beliefs that are contributing to the pain felt by Black, Indigenous people of color all across the world when you fail to acknowledge it. We live in a world where you can be an executive in a company like Amy Cooper reportedly was, a teacher, a clerk, a judge, a police officer, a business owner, an executive in a sports league, a magazine editor, and pretty much anything under the sun without ever having been intentional about unpacking your whiteness and privilege, and the implications of that are literally killing Black people and other people of color. Black pain is not just about incidences of people being killed by the police in America. Blacks also feel triggered by these incidences because it's a reminder of our own pain. Hateful stares and glares, being assumed a shoplifter, being stopped by the police for no reason, being passed up for promotions because you're just not the right fit, and the list goes on. When incidences like these occur, Black people don't want to just hear "I'm sorry" or "I'm angry" or "I'm afraid," nor do they want your silence or inaction. What they want to hear is some form of this: "I'm ready to unpack my own privilege and prejudice to become the ally I want to be." And I want you to engage in the difficult and lifelong work of educating yourself to awareness and taking action, showing your commitment to dismantling systems of racial oppression. Because the reality is, although you might abhor the socially unacceptable forms of racism, you almost certainly engage in, contribute to, or support the socially acceptable forms of the same cancer. We live in a society built on the myth of white supremacy. So just by virtue of breathing in the air, it's impossible to not have some internalized racist beliefs. And until the white community, as individuals and collectively, acknowledges this, racism is not going anywhere. If you really are committed to ending the systems of oppression, then the ball of change is in your court. Though you might not see yourself as racist, your implicit racial biases are probably felt by the Black people and people of color that you work with, hang out with, date, and those that might even be in your family. And if this is not something they feel comfortable openly discussing with you, it's because of this: your white fragility. And Black people and other people of color are conditioned to bend over backwards to help you to not feel uncomfortable about your racism. But no one should be more fearful of being called racist than they are of exhibiting racist behavior or perpetuating racist systems. Chances are you've seen this iconic shot from the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City. Here you see men's 200-meter gold medalist Tommie Smith and bronze medalist John Carlos, both of Team USA, giving the Black Power salute. And you also see the Australian silver medalist, Peter Norman, who not only stood as an ally to these two brave men, but ultimately laid down his white privilege to stand with them. For those of you who are serious about helping to dismantle systems of oppression, here we'll unpack the Peter Norman story and what his example teaches about how to be an effective ally in the struggle for racial equality. The 1960s were a time of great social and political unrest globally. Protests against the Vietnam War were gaining momentum. Black American athletes were facing discrimination at home. They were being kicked out of restaurants, made to use separate toilets, targeted by the police. The tensions culminated in America in 1968 with the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. on April 4th, followed by the assassination of Bobby Kennedy on June 6th. Black American athletes contemplated boycotting the Olympic Games, but ultimately decided that attending and performing well will give greater voice to their cause. The president of the International Olympic Committee at that time, Avery Brundage, vehemently opposed the politicization of sport. He had an anti-Semitic reputation and was believed to be responsible for the expulsion of 2 Jewish athletes at the 1936 Olympics. Athletes were warned not to demonstrate in Mexico City or they would be sent home. In the lead up to the Olympics, Smith and Carlos helped organize the Olympic Project for Human Rights. The aim of the organization was to protest against racial segregation in the United States and elsewhere, such as South Africa, and racism in sports in general, and to support Black pride and social consciousness. They had patches made for athletes to wear in support of the cause. When the games started, a number of American athletes made the podium, but none dared to protest until the night of the 200-meter final. In one of the greatest 200-meter races in Olympic history, Tommie Smith crosses the line in a blistering time of 19.83 seconds. It was a new world record. Peter Norman won silver with a time of 20.06, which still stands to this day as the Australian record. And John Carlos, who was the favorite for gold, ended up in third. However, what transpired afterwards would prove to be more memorable than the race itself. In a piece produced by Film for Action, it states that Smith and Carlos decided that they wanted to show the entire world what their fight for human rights looked like, and word spread among the athletes. Norman was a white man from Australia, a country that had strict apartheid laws, almost as strict as South Africa. There was tension and protests in the streets of Australia following heavy restrictions on non-white immigration and discriminatory laws against Aboriginal people, some of which consisted of forced adoptions of native children to white families. The 2 Americans had asked Norman if he believed in human rights, and Norman said that he did. They asked if he believed in God, and he, who had been in the Salvation Army, said he believed strongly in God. We knew what we were going to do was far greater than any athletic feat. And he said, "I'll stand with you," remembers John Carlos. I expected to see fear in Norman's eyes, but instead we saw love. Smith and Carlos decided to wear black gloves, and since one of them had forgotten to bring his pair, Norman suggested they wear 1 glove each. The American duo also wore the Olympic Project for Human Rights patches on their uniforms, a symbol of their battle for equality. But before they went out to receive their medals, Norman did something else. "I believe in what you believe. Do you have another one of those for me?" he asked, pointing to the Olympic Project for Human Rights badge on their chest. "That way I can show my support in your cause." Smith admitted to being astonished, ruminating. Who is this white Australian guy? He won his silver medal. Can't he just take it and that be enough? Smith, of course, wasn't about to give up his patch, so they happened to come across an American rower, Paul Hoffman, an activist from Harvard who had a patch and was happy to give it up to Norman. The 3 went out on the field, and Smith and Carlos mounted the podium barefoot, symbolic of the poverty their people were suffering in America. And as the anthem began, both bowed their heads and raised a single fist as a symbol of the Black Panthers' cause. I couldn't see what was happening, Norman recounted, but I had known that they had gone through with their plans when a voice in the crowd sang the American national anthem, but then faded to nothing. The stadium went quiet. Following their protest, the 3 and their families faced incredible hardships and fierce criticism for their actions. Smith and Carlos were sent home and banned from the Olympic team for life. Norman was hated by part of the establishment in Australia. Carlos said, "I don't think we fully comprehended what Peter was about to face when he went back home because he wore a button and God put him on the stand with us." He said, "When that anger and that viciousness came, I could shield myself with Tommie Smith, and Tommie Smith could shield himself with John Carlos. But who could Peter Norman shield himself with? He was a lone soldier in Australia." 4 years later, at the 1972 Summer Olympics in Munich, Germany, the selectors for the Australian team left Norman home despite the fact that he had hit qualifying standard 13 times in the 200 meter and 5 times in the 100. Back in Australia, he was treated like an outsider, his family outcasted, and work impossible to find. For a time, he worked as a gym teacher, continuing to struggle against inequalities as a trade unionist, and occasionally working in a butcher shop. An injury caused Norman to contract gangrene, which led to issues with depression and alcoholism. As John Carlos said, "If we were getting beat up, Peter was facing an entire country and suffering alone." For years, Norman had only one chance to save himself. He was invited to condemn his co-athletes John Carlos and Tommie Smith's gesture in exchange for a pardon from the system that ostracized him. A pardon that would have allowed him to find a stable job through the Australian Olympic Committee and be part of the organization of the 2000 Sydney Olympic Games. Norman never gave in and never condemned the choice of the two Americans. Norman died suddenly from a heart attack in 2006, without his country ever having apologized for their treatment of him. At his funeral, Tommie Smith and John Carlos, Norman's lifelong friends since 1968, gave eulogies and served as his pallbearers. They ensured he was sent off as a hero, although his country refused to give him such an honor. "He paid the price with his choice," explained Tommie Smith. "It wasn't just a simple gesture to help us. It was his fight. He was a white man, a white Australian man among two men of color, standing up in the moment of victory, all in the name of the same thing." It wasn't until 2012 that the Australian Parliament approved a motion to formally apologize to Peter Norman and rewrite him into history with this statement. "The House recognizes the extraordinary athletic achievements of the late Peter Norman, who won the silver medal in the 200 meters sprint running event at the 1968 Mexico City Olympics in a time of 20.06 seconds, which still stands as the Australian record. We acknowledge the bravery of Peter Norman in donning an Olympic Project for Human Rights badge on the podium in solidarity with African American athletes Tommie Smith and John Carlos, who gave the Black Power salute. Apologies to Peter Norman for the wrong done by Australia in failing to send him to the 1972 Munich Olympics despite repeatedly qualifying, and belatedly recognizes the powerful role that Peter Norman played in furthering racial equality." After giving up the honor of being celebrated as the greatest sprinter in Australian history, giving up financial rewards, accolades, and opportunities, was he bitter? Did he feel like he lost something? Never. When a statue was erected at San Jose University to honor the actions of Tommie Smith and John Carlos, and Peter Norman was asked how he felt about not being included in the statue, he said, "I was merely a rock cast into the deep still waters, and the reverberations of the ripples that went from the center of the pond are still traveling. It's a big pond. It's the entire world." He's also quoted as saying, "I couldn't see why a black man couldn't drink the same water from a water fountain, take the same bus, or go to the same school as a white man. There was a social injustice that I couldn't do anything for from where I was, but I certainly hated it. It has been said that sharing my silver medal with that incident on the Victory Day detracted from my performance. On the contrary, I have to confess, I was rather proud to be a part of it." He did not see their protests against the system of white supremacy as a threat to him as a man or an unwelcome challenge to his privilege, but instead he willingly gave it up to stand with his black brothers and took the position for the rest of his life. That's what Peter Norman did, and that's what it means to be an ally. In the words of Benjamin Franklin, justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you're interested in doing the work, I'm going to link some incredible resources below that might help you get started on your journey. And if you like this video, please consider subscribing to this channel for more content like this.